What if I were to tell you that the individual who would eventually address an audience exceeding 100 million souls began his journey as a complete failure? What if the most prominent evangelist of the 19th century was once denied membership in a church because his understanding of the Bible was considered insufficient? His name was Dwight Lyman Moody. However, this narrative is not solely his. It serves as a reflection, a query, and a challenge to every person who has ever pondered the question, can God utilize someone like me? Because this is what I want you to contemplate as we embark on this shared exploration. If the Almighty could take a shoe salesman with a minimal education and employ him to ignite fervent revivals across 2 continents, imagine what he might accomplish with your life once it is fully surrendered. But let us commence at the very outset, where every magnificent account of divine grace originates from a place of profound rupture. It was the month of February in the year 1841, on a piercingly cold winter morning in Northfield, Massachusetts. 4-year-old Dwight Moody was on the precipice of witnessing his world shatter. His father, Edwin, a man who worked as a brick mason and a small-scale farmer, lay utterly still on the kitchen floor. He had succumbed to a heart attack without any prior indication, without a farewell. Edwin left behind not only 9 children, but also an overwhelming burden of debt. Furthermore, his wife Betsy was expecting twins who would enter the world merely 1 month after his passing. Then, within mere days following the funeral, creditors descended upon the Moody farm like scavenging vultures. They seized every possession, from the furniture and the livestock to even the firewood, in the depths of winter. The widow's strategy for survival resulted in the fragmentation of the family. 4 of the older boys were dispatched to labor on neighboring farms. Some of the children were sent away to live with others, receiving room and board. Dwight himself endured meals of cornmeal, porridge, and milk 3 times each day at one such arrangement, until his mother discovered his distressing circumstances and brought him back home. Yet here is the initial observation I wish for you to grasp. The most exceptional servants of God frequently emerge from the most profound ruptures of life. When you have lost everything, you come to discern what and who truly hold significance. Perhaps you are familiar with that sensation. Perhaps you have stood amidst the wreckage of shattered aspirations, questioning whether God is aware of your existence. Hold on to that thought, for Dwight's story, and by extension your story, is only just beginning. Fast forward 13 years, and we find young Dwight still bearing the lingering marks of that period of destitution. In the springtime of 1854, 17-year-old Dwight arrived in Boston with a singular, impassioned objective: to escape the crushing poverty of his upbringing. His uncle extended him an offer of employment in a shoe establishment, but with one non-negotiable stipulation: attendance at church every Sunday. And so, week after week, within the walls of that Mount Vernon Congregational Church, a quiet Sunday school teacher named Edward Kimball began to notice the young man who seemed incapable of sitting still. For several weeks, Kimball grappled with a persistent inner conviction that he could not ignore. I must speak to Dwight about his soul, he felt compelled. Now, here is what deeply resonates with me concerning this pivotal juncture. Kimball was not a renowned preacher. He possessed no formal theological education. He was simply an ordinary man who responded affirmatively to God's gentle urging. On the 21st day of April in 1855, Kimball finally mustered the courage. He later recounted his approach to the shoe store. As I neared the location, I began to question whether I should enter at that very moment during business hours. I worried my visit might embarrass the boy, but I continued walking. Finding Dwight in the rear section of the establishment, busily packaging shoes, Kimball gently placed his hand on the young man's shoulder and articulated what he would later describe as a rather timid appeal. He simply stated, "I informed him of Christ's affection for him and the love Christ desired in return." That was the extent of it. Right there, within that dusty storeroom, surrounded by leather and laces, Dwight Lyman Moody gave his heart to Christ. He would later recall, "I had not perceived that I possessed a soul until that moment, and I can still feel the resonance of that man's hand on my shoulder even tonight." The subsequent morning ushered in a palpable transformation. "I perceived the old sun shining considerably brighter than it ever had before," Moody remembered. "As I walked out onto Boston Common and heard the birds singing in the trees, I felt as though they were all singing a song just for me. It seemed as though I was enamored with all of creation." Yet, his conversion was merely the commencement. The subsequent chapter of Dwight's narrative would unfold not in the tranquil environs of New England, but rather in the rugged and bustling frontier city of Chicago. By the month of September in 1856, the 19-year-old Moody had relocated to Chicago with a fervent ambition to amass $100,000 and establish himself as someone significant. He sold shoes by day, ascended the ladder of professional achievement, and was well on his way to realizing his American dream. But gradually, the Almighty began to subtly redirect his path. Moody commenced visiting the impoverished districts, gathering street children for Sunday school. These were grubby children, unruly children, children that no one else seemed to care about. And remarkably, within a single year, over 1,500 children filled his makeshift classroom, constituting the largest Sunday school in Chicago. The impact was so extraordinary that on the 25th day of November in 1860, President-elect Abraham Lincoln himself paid a visit, addressing the street children with these words, "I was once as impoverished as any boy in this school, but I am now the President of the United States. And if you pay heed to what is taught to you here, some of you may yet become President of the United States." Revival did not commence with eloquent sermons. It began with unadorned compassion. One individual recognizing what others overlooked. One heart resonating with that which grieves God's heart. Who are the marginalized children in your sphere? Whom have others dismissed that God desires for you to reach? For the ensuing 15 years, Moody's ministry thrived. His influence expanded. His reputation grew. But then arrived the night that would irrevocably alter everything. It was Sunday evening, the 8th of October in 1871. The Great Chicago Fire was on the verge of igniting, and within a single calamitous night, all that Moody had meticulously constructed would be reduced to cinders. His church, his residence, the culmination of his life's endeavors, all of it was gone. But as Moody traversed the smoldering ruins the following morning, something more profound than mere structures had fractured within him. You see, on that very Sunday night, he had preached to a hall packed with attendees, urging them to contemplate his message and return the following week to make a decision for Christ. Many never made it home. The inferno consumed them, along with the city. Standing amidst those ashes, Moody made a solemn promise that he would never break. "Never again will I extend a gospel invitation without requesting an immediate commitment." Sometimes, divine intervention employs fiery trials to refine us. Occasionally, he permits everything we have, painstakingly built, to crumble, so that he can construct something eternal through us. Broken and seeking answers, Moody embarked on a journey that would transform not only his ministry, but his very essence. Merely weeks after the devastating conflagration, Moody traveled to New York City, not for the purpose of ministry, but for his own spiritual rejuvenation. Two women from Chicago, Mrs. Sarah Cook and Mrs. Hawkshurst, had been earnestly imploring for months that God would imbue Moody with his spirit. Day after day, he traversed Wall Street as a man parched with thirst, crying out to God, "Fill me with your spirit. I have no desire to preach relying solely on my own strength." And then, on one unforgettable occasion while walking along Wall Street, it occurred. Moody later penned, "I was weeping continuously, imploring God to fill me with His Spirit." Well, one day in the city of New York, oh, what a day it was. I cannot adequately describe it. I seldom allude to it. It is an experience almost too sacred to be named. I can only state that God revealed Himself to me, and I experienced such a profound realization of His love that I had to ask Him to restrain His hand. From that moment forward, everything underwent a complete metamorphosis. As Moody later testified, the sermons themselves did not alter, but hundreds were converted. The crucial distinction was that the man delivering them was no longer operating on a depleted reserve. Yet, God was not finished orchestrating divine encounters in Moody's existence. The ensuing encounter would forge a partnership destined to reshape history. At a Young Men's Christian Association convention held in Indianapolis in June of 1870, Moody encountered Ira Sankey, a government revenue officer from Pennsylvania, possessing an exceptional vocal talent. During a rather languid prayer meeting, Sankey's rendition of "There is a fountain filled with blood" electrifyingly captivated the assembly. True to his nature, Moody's approach was characteristically direct. "I have been searching for you for 8 years. I want you to come with me." Sankey initially perceived Moody as perhaps a touch eccentric, but sometimes the most monumental movements commence with what the world might deem an outlandish act of obedience. Together, they would emerge as the most potent evangelistic pairing of their era. The formula was uncomplicated, yet profoundly supernatural. Sankey perfectly articulated their synergistic dynamic. "We are both preachers. The sole difference is that Moody touches men's hearts with spoken words, while I reach them with sung words." Hearts would soften, lives would undergo transformation, and revival would spread with astonishing speed. And so, in the year 1873, this unlikely duo stepped out in faith towards what would prove to be their most significant undertaking. In June of 1873, Moody and Sankey set sail for England. They were not arriving as celebrated evangelists, but rather as relatively unknown Americans, responding to an invitation extended by two individuals who had since passed away. This was a profound act of faith that demanded absolute reliance on God's divine guidance. What transpired over the ensuing 2 years defied all human comprehension. Commencing in York and subsequently proceeding through the grand cities of Scotland and England, revival erupted wherever they ministered. Edinburgh witnessed the addition of 3,000 individuals to its churches during their mission. Glasgow saw its 5,000-seat Crystal Palace filled nightly, culminating in the accession of over 7,000 new members to Glasgow's churches. But perhaps the most miraculous moment occurred on the 18th day of May in 1874. While traveling by train from Glasgow to Edinburgh, Sankey discovered Elizabeth Clefane's poem, The 90 and 9, tucked away in a newspaper corner. The following evening, after Moody had delivered a sermon on the Good Shepherd, he requested an appropriate solo performance. Although Sankey had no written music, he felt an overwhelming compulsion to sing. Note by note, the melody emerged, a tune that has remained unaltered to this day. Moody, with tears in his eyes, inquired, "Where did you obtain this hymn? I have never encountered anything quite like it in my entire life." Coincidentally, Clephaine's sister was present in the audience that evening. In London alone, they conducted 285 services across 4 major venues simultaneously, with an aggregate attendance of 2,500,000 individuals over a 4-month period. Even Queen Victoria dispatched representatives. The British press coined the term the Moody Wave. But here is what profoundly moves me about this entire phenomenon. Moody never claimed credit for himself. He understood the underlying secret. "I am merely the match," he would say. "God provides the fire." What might transpire if you ceased striving to be the fire and simply embraced the role of the match? What if it is surrender, rather than inherent skill, that God is actively seeking? When Moody and Sankey returned to American shores in the summer of 1875, everything had changed. They were no longer obscure figures. Now, cities across America vied to host their evangelistic campaigns. From Boston to Philadelphia, from New York to Chicago, wherever they journeyed, revival invariably followed in their footsteps. But by this juncture, Moody had acquired a crucial understanding in Britain that fundamentally altered his approach to ministry. Revival is not contingent upon the evangelist. It is a testament to the earnest prayers of God's people and the potent work of His Spirit flowing through surrendered instruments. Before his ministry concluded, an estimated 100 million individuals would have heard the gospel through Moody's voice. However, these numbers only partially encapsulate the extraordinary narrative. In city after city, taverns were shuttered, crime rates plummeted, families were mended, and the spiritual climate of entire communities experienced a profound elevation. This was genuine revival. Not merely emotionally charged gatherings, but communities that were demonstrably transformed. Yet, even at the zenith of his influence, Moody was already contemplating beyond the confines of his own earthly existence. He grasped something profound regarding enduring impact. On the 22nd day of January in 1886, recognizing that revival without subsequent training leads to stagnation, Moody established what would become known as the Moody Bible Institute. At the inaugural gathering in Farwell Hall, Moody declared, "I believe we must have individuals who can bridge the gap between the ailing and the clergy, men who are adequately trained for urban missionary work. We must identify individuals possessing the necessary aptitudes and equip them for the task of reaching the populace." The institution imposed no tuition fees, nor did it stipulate any social prerequisites. The guiding principle was beautifully simple: educate, equip, evangelize. Students arrived from farms and factories, from backgrounds of both wealth and poverty, united by a singular passion: to serve Christ. But perhaps the most far-reaching consequence stemmed from the 1886 Mount Hermon Student Conference, where 100 students from 89 different colleges pledged themselves to become foreign missionaries. This event sparked the student volunteer movement, which ultimately dispatched over 20,000 long-term missionaries from America over the subsequent 40 years. From these halls, there would eventually emerge thousands of missionaries, pastors, evangelists, and Christian workers who would carry the torch of faith to every continent on earth. Moody understood that his time was finite. Consequently, he sought to multiply his impact through others. How are you investing in the emerging generation? What enduring legacy are you diligently constructing? And so, as the year 1899 drew to a close, we find our evangelist returned to the very locale where his remarkable story first unfolded, the modest town of Northfield, Massachusetts. His final evangelistic campaign in Kansas City, Missouri, concluded prematurely on the 16th day of November in 1899, when he collapsed while delivering a sermon to an assembly of 15,000 individuals at Convention Hall. Upon returning to Northfield, Massachusetts, he passed away, surrounded by his family, on the 22nd day of December in 1899, precisely at midday at the age of 62. His final utterances were prophetic. "God is calling me." When his son, William, expressed concern, Moody responded with unwavering certainty, "No, I am at the gates. I have seen the children." He was referring to his deceased grandchildren. "This is my coronation day, and I have been anticipating it for years." Will thought his father might be experiencing a dream, but Moody offered a smile with absolute conviction. "No, Will, this is no dream. I have already passed through the gates. I have seen the children." And then, with his final earthly breath, these unforgettable words were spoken. "This is my coronation day. I have been looking forward to it for years." That was more than a century ago. Yet the fervent spirit that Dwight Moody embodied, that flame, still burns vibrantly today. Dwight Lyman Moody is no longer with us, but the fire he carried continues to illuminate. It is not found in edifices or established institutions, but rather within hearts that have been surrendered to the same divine entity who transformed a poor farm boy into an agent of global change. Here is what I want you to comprehend. Moody did not achieve success due to any inherent natural talent. His success was a direct result of his complete and unreserved surrender. The world continues to yearn for another figure like Moody. Not someone to merely imitate him, but rather an individual willing to emulate his example of unwavering and radical obedience to Christ. Perhaps that individual is you. Perhaps God has been diligently preparing you through every setback, every dashed hope, every moment of profound desperation for something you cannot yet envision. Moody once declared, "The world has yet to witness what God is capable of doing with a person who is fully dedicated to Him. By God's assistance, I intend to be that person." So, what if you were to utter those very same words today? What if you ceased fabricating excuses and began making yourself available? What if, at this precise moment, you made the conscious decision to relinquish everything to Jesus Christ? Because here lies the profound truth that Moody discovered and lived by. You do not need to attain fame to be faithful. You do not require official credentials to be summoned. You do not need to be flawless to wield power. You simply need to be entirely His. What will you do with this singular life that God has bestowed upon you? The radiant force that revolutionized the world continues to burn brightly today. The sole remaining question is this: will you carry it forward? Dwight Moody demonstrated unequivocally that God utilizes surrendered vessels, not perfected ones. The shoe salesman with minimal education, who was once denied church membership, addressed an audience exceeding 100 million individuals because he ceased attempting to be the fire and simply became the match. Comment with "I am fully His" below if you are prepared to surrender everything to Jesus Christ this very moment. Do not forget to activate that notification bell, give a like, and subscribe to Light Within Stories for more life-altering accounts of faith that will empower you to boldly fulfill God's calling in your life. This week, identify 3 specific areas where you have been hesitant to fully surrender to God. Each morning, offer a focused prayer concerning one of these areas, imploring God to assume complete control. Document in a journal what He reveals to you about letting go and entrusting Him with everything. However, if Moody's profound surrender has astonished you, allow me to introduce you to Jonathan Edwards next. What if a pastor's child, burdened by chronic illness and grappling with depression and social awkwardness, ultimately became America's most esteemed theologian? What if the same individual who found it challenging to navigate social interactions delivered a single sermon that literally compelled attendees to clutch church pillars, convinced they were on the verge of eternal damnation? What 70 resolutions did he meticulously formulate at the tender age of 20 that have shaped American Christianity for centuries? Could those very same principles transform your life today? Please watch the following video to discover how a socially reserved frontier pastor ignited the Great Awakening, the mystical encounters with divine beauty that fueled his ministry, and why total consecration to God yields generational influence far beyond your comprehension.